welcome to the Spirit Lounge. Hope you guys are doing well. It's been a long time since we've caught up with each other. Today is going to be the first of a series of videos on the Dead Sea Scrolls. Just before we start, I do want to give comment on the Dead Sea Scrolls. For those who watched the Apocrypha series, you'll notice that I don't connect with the Old Testament God. I believe that what is described there is not the source, the Father that I know, that I connect with, that I seek to become closer to, that guides my life and the passage in which I take. The same was the same discourse I found in the Apocrypha, which was describing the many wars, the separation of nations, the exceptionalism, and again the wrathful, vengeful deity that was the one upon all high God. The Dead Sea Scrolls was a disappointment again because it was almost mirroring in some respects the same messaging. And that for me is a disappointment because I was hoping that it would have a lot more of the Gospels of Yeshua in there. But that was a mistake on my part because it was really describing the community of Qumran and the Essenes who lived as ascetics in the community in Qumran. And Yeshua was taught there and was there for a while, and then left to discover his own passage and path in life. And so there wasn't going to be anything really describing the Gospels, the teachings of Yeshua specifically, which are the ones I really connect to, the ones I feel within. There's an essence within me that resonates specifically with his Gospels. So there was a disappointment there. However, it was something that I wanted to read. I wanted to find more about the Essene community, and they do see themselves as being the true Judeans. They lived in a Judean community in the towns that were there around, but they separated themselves into two. And they describe them as the true ones, the more ascetic ones, the ones who followed the covenant or the laws of Moses to its letter. Very strict ascetic life, partial communism. So we're going to go in through that today, the community and describing the community, and then also describing the Essenes themselves and some of their practices and laws around them. And then we'll go into some more of it. And if you follow along, all of the book has been transcribed. I'm yet to put it all into full PowerPoint. I'll be finishing that, but they'll be coming one after another in quick sessions, and they will be lengthy in time because there is a lot to get through. So if you wish to, drop in and out, and I'll give my narrative as we move along. Okay, so without further ado, let's move forward into the presentation. Okay, so the Dead Sea Scrolls. So the Dead Sea Scrolls were found in 1947 by a young Arab shepherd climbing into caves. There's numerous caves in which these scrolls were found. And stumbled across the first Dead Sea Scrolls. Some of them are in various states of health, if you like. Some of them are in good states, and other ones are deteriorating considerably. Very similar to the Gnostic texts that were found as well around the same time. And they were liberated in 1991 after a revolution. The Dead Sea Scrolls are also called the Qumran Caves Scrolls, and a set of the Jewish manuscripts from the Second Temple period, about 3 to 1 BCE. Although there is some discourse in here which suggests that the Qumran community actually established itself, the Essenes established around 150 BC. Okay, let's get straight into this. By the way, this is the book I chose to move in. It's Geza Vermes, a very good book on the Dead Sea Scrolls if you wish to follow along. We should read it for yourselves. There's lots of discourse in here, passages from the author, and also subtext. So it's a good book to follow if you want to understand Dead Sea Scrolls yourself. Okay, introduction. A lot of this is from the author. So on the western shore of the Dead Sea, about 8 miles south of Jericho, lies a complex of ruins known as the Khirbet Qumran. It occupies one of the lowest parts of the earth on the fringe of the hot and arid waste of the wilderness of Judea, and is today, apart from occasional invasions by coachloads of tourists, lifeless, silent, and empty. But from that place, members of an ancient religious community whose center it was center it was, hurried out one day in secrecy, limbed the nearby cliffs to hide away in 11 caves, precious scrolls before their community was destroyed, apparently, potentially by the Kimmet, which are the Romans. They remained untouched for almost 2,000 years. In 1948 and 49, Sukenik published in Hebrew 2 preliminary surveys entitled Hidden Scrolls from the Judean Desert, and concluded that the religious community involved was the ascetic sect of the Essenes, well known from the 1st century CE writings of Philo, so 100 CE, Common Era before AD, in other words, Philo Judaeus, the Hellenistic Jewish philosopher who lived in Alexandria, in the Roman province of Egypt, Josephus, Flavius Josephus, a Roman Jewish historian, another military leader, and Pliny, the elder of a Roman author. They all wrote about the Essenes and the Qumran community. And a thesis worked out in great detail in 950 words almost by Andrew Dupont in Paris. So you can research and read all of these as well. The provenance of the manuscript at the same time, the Essenes' identity of the ancient inhabitants of Qumran gained a general acceptance. The Qumran finds have also substantially altered our views concerning the text and the canon of the Bible. So there is some relation to the New Testament, association with the Old Testament, and the Essenes give their own interpretation of the trueness of biblical text and scripture. Okay, the introduction. Turning to the real relationship between the Dead Sea Scrolls and Testaments, this can be presented under a threefold heading, which is fundamental similarities. There's also potentially ideologies, and there's also the attitude to the Bible. There's the fulfillment of the words of the prophets. Very similar aspects there. The Essenes do have a monarchic administration in terms of they have a single leader and ascetics and priests, and religious communism. And it is a historical, in the study of historical Yeshua, or Jesus, if you like, Yeshua being its actually original name, there's not much in the Dead Sea Scrolls about that, and as you wouldn't expect, there shouldn't be. And in the final destiny of the soul, although Yeshua was there during that time, there's no particular writings about him. Okay, the community. The community rule legislates for a group of ascetics living in a kind of monastic society. The statutes of the Damascus document for an ordinary lay existence. The sectaries were the people in the community, regarding themselves as the true Israel, as I mentioned before. They separated from those in the towns. They organized their movements so that it corresponded faithfully to that of the Jewish people, dividing it into priests and laity, and the laity grouped after the biblical model of the 12 tribes. So there are 12 leaders and Levites as priests, so they modeled themselves on that. The population of Qumran, an establishment of undoubted importance to the Judean following and community and religious order, can never be numbered more than 150 to 200 people. So 200 souls at a time. Monastic brotherhood at Qumran alludes to itself in the community rule as the men of holiness. Establishment was devoted exclusively to religion. They found made pots, cured hides, and reproduced manuscripts of their own teachings, their own interpretations. They were to eat in common and bless in common and deliberate in common, did everything together in a communal way, and to seek God with a whole heart and soul, obedient to one of the laws of Moses and to all that was commanded by the prophets. They were to love one another and to share with one another their knowledge, powers, and possessions, separate from Torah in the wilderness, and thereby atone for the land. And its wicked men to whom they were to nourish their everlasting hatred, the firm conviction that their fate in God's was in God's hands. So what does this actually last passage mean? Effectively means that they're cascading their teachings out from people who are coming into the Qumran community and then going out into the community as well to teach what was the Essenes' scripture, the knowledge, the doctrine, but also everlasting hatred to those who actually didn't like them from the outside world, not necessarily being from the community that they was with, but others like the Kittim and other nations at that time. It says, I will pay no man the reward of evil. I will pursue him with goodness, for judgment for all things is with God, and it is he who will render to man his reward. Judgment isn't with God, judgment is with yourself. It is for yourself to judge and decide what you decide to do in life within your soul's passage. Your actions, words, thoughts, and intentions are your judge. You choose either the left to the right, to the right to the light, and the left to the dark, and the wanderings of loss in the middle. The community, to be truthful, humble, upright, this is the general principle. To be truthful, humble, just, upright, charitable, and modest. Upright and just means in strength of your devotion and commitment, and knowing that what you're following is right and true. Men devoting themselves to contemplation, that the contemplative life is not a regular feature of Judaism. They were expected to become proficient in the knowledge of the two spirits in which men walk, the spirit of truth and falsehood, truth being that of godliness, that of grace unveiling itself to you, and falsehood being that which is turned away, and to learn how to discriminate between them. The hierarchy at Qumran was strict and formal, from the highest level to the lowest. The order of his rank was always around the state of which your gnosis was, your transcendental elevation and ascendance in spiritual knowing and knowledge. The term order recurs constantly. Members of the Zadokite high priestly family took over the leadership of the sect. The superior and the so-called Mibagger or guardian was undoubtedly one of their number. In their hands lay ultimate responsibility for decisions on matters of doctrine, discipline, purity, impurity, justice, and property. Now, this has always been the case, and I want to give you, pass on some advice of discernment. Pundits, priests, rabbis, gurus, any form of holy men who could stand on pulpits, pedestals, on stages, preaching what they determine being the interpretation of doctrine. Some of them are teaching word for word, literal meaning, literalness of it. Others are more nuanced in their transcendental spiritual meaning in words. Others are more, much more evangelical or even militant, even extremist in their doctrine. All these, if taken in extreme, will separate you from other nations, separate you from other people. There is no community on this earth which is exceptional or chosen by God. There does not exist. There is no holy land. Everything is divine, because there are holy lands everywhere. A Buddhist will call a mountaintop in Nepal of the northern India holy. A Jewish would call Jerusalem holy, or the Temple Mount. A Muslim would call Mecca holy. The Hindu would call something else, the birthplace of Krishna or the death of Krishna, holy. This is their holy land. So what is holy land? Holy land is just what that particular religious order determines it to be for them. It doesn't mean there is a holy land on this earth. There isn't. This earth is divine. It's a manifestation of grace itself, is it not? So everything is divine. The holy land is within you. Remember, the bridal chamber is within you. The church that you must preserve and give love and care and nurture to is within yourself. So be very, very mindful when you're following doctrine of any kind to understand when it was written. When these doctrines were written, it was 2,000 years ago or long or further out. There was lots of war between nations and in religious orders. They hated each other, they killed each other, they thought each other were inferior, i.e. these are referring to other nations as Gentiles in this case, and they had to be killed. This is in the War Scroll, which I haven't spent much time on because I will not spend time on anything that is not transcendental in nature. I'm not interested in describing wars or of the past, have no relevance to anything in this day and age, in the way that humanity has moved on. So be wary. Take what is transcendental. Take this transcendental spiritual meaning from what you're reading. If you find nothing in it, then do not bother reading it. There's nothing to be gained from taking this literal, because this was what it was 2,000 years ago. Today, we are a more unified humanity. And therefore, we are looking for spiritual purpose and meaning in our journeys, our personal and private passages through life. There are many spokes to the center of the wheel. You'll pass through you'll traverse and move along many of those spokes, but the center is the same for all of us. Remember that. Okay, a priest was to recite the grace before common meals. Priesthood at Qumran is that their priest precedence was absolute. In Judaism, the priest is superior to the Levite, The Levite in this case was the priestly class in a lot of the synagogues you'll find now. Same as the Brahmins in Hinduism and so forth. The highest office was vested in the person of the guardian. So this is the master. A community was to be taught by him how to live in conformity with the book of the community rule, the doctrine of the two spirits, remember that one of falsehood and truth. He was to preside over assemblies, the spiritual progress of the men in his charge, and rank them. The men of the pit or the dawn, i.e. Belial, and not to transmit them to the sex teachings. You don't teach them anything, those who are of wickedness. The community continues, all members to sit in their correct places. The priest shall sit first, the elders second, and all the rest of the people according to their ranks. You see, there's a very monarchic order to this. In the council of the community, there shall be 12 men and 3 priests. Remember the 12 tribes and 3 priests, which are the Levites. These are resembling the 12 wandering tribes. There's 12 men. It's to symbolically represent that. Perfectly versed in all that is revealed of the law, who works shall be truth, righteousness, justice, loving kindness, and humility. They shall preserve the faith in the land with steadfastness and meekness, and shall atone for sin by the practice of justice and by suffering the sorrows of affliction. I'm not necessarily agreeing with that. They shall walk with all men according to the standard of truth and the rule at the time. So it's what's steadfastness and meekness? Well, what this actually means, meekness isn't cowering down and bowing down and being weak and lily-livered and wishy-washy. This is talking about humility with the iron strength of a rod of spine within your knowing of what you are following and the gnosis of the divine within you. But it's going with the humility and the humbleness, but the strength shining within the aura within you of humility. This humility and strength go together within your auric field, within how your energy and you transmit within yourself. Stand up straight, upright, look forward, and say what you wish to say with strength, not mumbling, with order, with clarity, and be you with steadfastness. Show humility and humbleness towards others. Symbolically portrayed as consisting of the 12 tribes and 3 Levitical clans, the purpose of the meetings is to debate the law, select or reject newcomers under the guidance of the guardian. Quiet were to prevail. A person wishing to offer his opinion or ask a question was to crave permission, or you were to ask. The community. I have something to say to the congregation and then wait for their consent before going ahead. Statement from the Qumran Scrolls. The procedure followed in inquiries into infringements of law and sex rule has been preserved, beginning with a blacklist sins, any transgression by commission or omission of one word of the law of Moses, or on any point whatsoever earned outright expulsion. Well, to a degree, you had to have forfeit, and sometimes you had to, for 2 years, have some kind of penance. But it depends on what you've done. If any man has uttered the most venerable name, even though frivolously or as a result of shock or for any other reason whatsoever, while reading the book or blessing, he shall be dismissed and shall return no more. Whoever has murmured against the authority of the community shall be expelled and shall not return. Okay, the community. In a descending order of gravity, a man who betrayed the truth and walked in the stubbornness of his heart, or transgressed the Mosaic law inadvertently, with 2 years' penance, he has to lose his rank and during the first year be separated from the purity of the congregation, and during the second year from its drink. He was then to be re-examined by the congregation and returned to his place in the order, of course, if he's fulfilled all the penance. Lying in matters of property, partial concealment of personal possessions earned exclusion from purity for a year and a cut by 1/4 of the food ration. Disrespect to a companion of higher rank, rudeness and anger towards a priest earned 1 year of penance and exclusion. For lying deliberately and similarly deceiving by word or deed, or forbearing malice unjustly, for taking revenge, the sectary was to atone for 6 months, for failing to care for a companion and for speaking foolishly. 3 months, for falling asleep during a meeting of a council, for being so poorly dressed, a penal code. So there's different penalties in penal code impositions depending on what you've done, and a lot of it's in the Damascus document of the Qumran Scrolls. The community again continues. The common table that only the fully professed and the faultless were inscribed for purity were not allowed to sit at it. There is no explicit mention of a ritual bath preceding the meals, but from various references to the purification of water. By water, sectaries immersed themselves before eating, as did the Essenes, according to Josephus. The priest was to be the first to bless the food and drink. Wine drunk by the sectaries, the drink of the congregation, was unfermented grape juice. So water is very, very common. It's in the Upanishads, it's in the Shinto, it's also in the Tipitaka, where water was always used as a cleansing material, as a cleansing and something to cleanse oneself before you ate and prayed or had communion. According to the regime adopted at Qumran, a person desiring to join the sect remained on probation, certainly for 2 years and possibly for 3 or more. His first move was to appear before the guardian at the head of the congregation, meaning no doubt during a session of the congregation who inquired into his principles to discover if he was a suitable postulant. If they were satisfied, he entered the covenant. That is to say, he solemnly swore there and then to adhere to the Torah as the sect interpreted it and vowing to follow it. So remember, the sect interprets Torah differently to those outside of the sect, outside of Qumran, in the towns and the cities and the villages. By binding oath to return with all his heart and soul to every commandment of the law of Moses, in accordance with all that has been revealed of it to the sons of Zadok. Okay, continue the community. This concept of pure things, literally purity or purities, rabbinic literature, ritually pure food, vessels and utensils, the novice not to touch the pure things of the congregation. So if you're a novice who just entered, you cannot touch these things. You cannot touch the food or the vessels. It has to be given to you. Forbade him all contact with its pots, plates, bowls, and necessarily the food that they held. During his first year, the newcomer could not share the sect's property. He had examined for his understanding and observance of the law. He was examined. He handed over his money and the belongings to the bursar of the congregation. His second year, the ban on touching the pots, the pure things, was relaxed. With the second year over, the novice had once more to undergo an examination, after which, according to the judgment of the congregation, he was at last inscribed among the brethren and able to touch food, I suppose. So as you can see, it's very ascetic, very strict. He then secondly embarks on a course of training as a preliminary to joining the holy congregation. Debated whether the Qumran sectaries were married or celibate. They were actually enjoined not to follow a sinful heart and lustful eyes, committing to all manner of evil. The word Isha, woman, occurs nowhere in the community rule, although there were women there. The main graveyard itself, the 26 tombs so far opened at random, 1,100 have all contained adult male skeletons. On the peripheries of the cemetery, the bones of 6 women and 3 children too. The married sectaries employed servants, engaged in commerce and trade, even with Gentiles. Tended cattle, grew vines and corn in the surrounding fields, and discharged their duties in temple by way of offering. So if you were married, I think you were seen as a lesser. Just slightly, it seems from here. But if you weren't married and you had a complete celibate life, I think it elevated you within the community. According to the latter rule, members of the covenant were permitted to marry at the age of 20. When they were estimated to have reached adulthood and to know good and evil, allowed to assist at hearings and judgments. At 25, they advanced to work in the service of the congregation. So this is when they were married. It's 20 when they're not married. When I think they were allowed to be accepted into the community at 20. It is explicitly stated that in the absence of a properly qualified priest, he was to be replaced by a Levite who would perform all the functions of a superior except those specifically reserved in the Bible for a master or a guardian. There is reference to the company of Israel, on the advice on which it would elicit it to attack Gentiles. But this type of war council mentioned also is in the Messianic rule. can surely have nothing to do with the assemblies described in the community rule. Again, remember, as I described before, attack on Gentiles, the war scroll. This was all written because it was relevant at the time where everybody was fighting each other. There was hatred towards Jews, Jews to Arabs, and so forth. It was just continuing, it never ended. There was fighting for religious reasons. There was forced indoctrination. These are the time of, I wouldn't say there was many faiths and followings way before. Hinduism goes way before the Qumran sect and the Essenes were developed way before. I would say before or even older, or at the same time as the law of Moses was brought to bear, and Judaism was created. Many thousands of years older than the coming of the Christ, Yeshua. So, but there's always been warring. We are in a different state now, but however, as I mentioned before, there are those who preach literal meanings in very extremist ways and brainwash people to hate. And this is happening while wars are created and people are killing each other. And that in our towns and cities today, there is some places you cannot go. There are enclaves, there are ghettos of these communities. This is something that needs to end, and this is because there is no discernment in those followers. There's literally giving up one's soul and heart to a preacher on a pulpit, a rabbi, priest, guru, whatever it might be. This is to be for your own journey, and if you're watching this channel, then you are of more discernment than that. Because this, I strongly advise discernment, contemplation, and meditation. Take the transcendental meaning from what you're reading. If there is none, move on. Instead of dealing with offenders in the community, courts of inquiry, the towns had their tribunals for hearing cases, equipped moreover with judges, be 10 in number, drawn from the tribes of Levi, Aaron, and Israel. The guardian was also implicated in legal matters. He had to determine whether it should be brought before the court to avoid being put to death for the capital sin of uttering the names of God. The sectary must swear by the covenant alone. If he subsequently violated his oath, he would then have to only to confess to the priest and make restitution. He is threatened with death if he vows another to destruction by the laws of the Gentiles. So there is something around the death being imposed, but it's difficult to understand whether they actually did that. Renewal of the covenant. The annual great festival alluded to in 4 QD, Qumran document, Damascus Qumran document, when both the men of holiness and the men of the covenant confessed their former errors and committed themselves once more to perfect obedience to the law. Damascus document described, the Qumran Damascus document, lesson 4 QD, described the expulsion ceremony of an unfaithful member. He was cursed and dismissed by the priest overseeing the congregation. And all those who have entered the covenant, granted to all Israel forever, shall make their children who have reached the age of enrollment swear with the oath of the covenant. Enrollment into the sect is represented as the climax of childhood and youth spent in study. From his youth they shall instruct him in the book of meditation, and shall teach him, according to his age, the precepts of the covenant. They shall be educated in their statutes for 10 years. At the age of 20 years he shall be enrolled. Remember, it's 25 if you're married. That he may enter upon his allotted duties in the midst of his family and be joined to the holy congregation. It should be added here that one big difference between the organisation of the brethren in the towns and those in the monastic settlement of Qumran, that is, the new members were not required to surrender their property. Now, it normally is you're supposed to surrender all your property and material possessions, all of it, to the community, and it becomes part of community holdings. There was none of the voluntary communism found at Qumran. In the desert of Qumran, men lived together in seclusion. In the towns, they were grouped in families. Yet the dissimilarities are the basic level of doctrine, aims, and principles. A perceptible bond links the brethren of the desert with those of the towns. Well, it does through the doctrines. Remember, they're all following Judaic scripture and the Torah. They both claim to represent the true Israel. They both are led by priests, Zadokite priests according to the Qumran Damascus document, and the Messianic rule. So they all followed the same thing. So they were really brethren, although there doesn't seem to be having a formal connection or interaction in the Qumran documents or Qumran scrolls, or the Dead Sea Scrolls to that effect. They are both governed by priests or Levites. There can be only one logical conclusion. This was a single religious movement with two branches. Neither are we told whether the sectaries of the desert and towns maintain regular contact among themselves. The passage from the exhortation advising men to choose whatever is pleasing to God and to reject whatever he hates. Remember, it's you who chooses. That ye may walk perfectly in all these ways and not follow after thoughts of the guilty inclination and after eyes of lust, seems to be addressed to celibates. Okay, the community finally wrapped here, and if they live in camps according to the rule of the land, marrying and begetting children, they shall walk according to the law and according to the statute governing binding vows, according to the rule of the law which says, between a man and his wife, and between a father and his son. So I'm just going to edit this a little bit here because, excuse me, I don't know why that's changed. Probably for the online edit. This is a repeat of what we've already done, so I apologize. I'm just going to correct that now. Okay, and just move that up there. Okay, we'll continue. Okay, the Essenes and the Qumran community. We're going more into the Essenes now, beyond the community itself. Prior to Qumran, the primary sources concerning the Essenes, a Jewish religious community flourishing during the last 2 centuries of the Second Temple era, 150 to 160, this is when they was really determined they were around, were furnished by the Greek writings and 2 Jewish authors, Philo, and then obviously Flavius Josephus and Pliny the Elder. They all wrote about this community and the Qumran community around this time. There is no general agreement regarding the meaning of the group's name. This is interesting. So there's a Greek Essaioi and Essenoi in Greek, and also Essenai in Latin. It basically means pious or healers. Now this makes sense to the Essenes because this is where they're living a pious community. It was meaning the Essenes that were seen as the pious, the healers, the holy men. The Essaioi, the Essenoi, or the SNE. So this was, it's interesting that it does mean pious or healers because this is a good description for what the Essenes, or what the Essenes were trying to become or were representing. This Qumran attests both communism and private property, married and unmarried states. Likewise, Josephus speaks of celibate and married Essenes, and as it has been noted, the prohibition to fornicate with one's wife remarkably echoes the married Essenes ban on marital sex when the woman was not in a state to conceive, so can only have sex during that time. Furthermore, the Qumran movement incorporated 2 separate branches. It must finally be borne in mind that the sectarian compositions were written by initiates for insiders, whereas Pliny and Philo, and to some extent Josephus, are bound to have reproduced hearsay. So they're saying if you can find something that was written by the Essenes themselves, it's more reliable than anything Pliny, Philo, and Josephus would have written, because it could have absorbed anything from the towns around them or hearsay about what the Essenes in the community were. The identification of Essenism and the Qumran sect remains, in my view, the likeliest of all proposed solutions. The history of the community. Chronicles are concerned not with factual information about bygone events, but with their religious significance. In Scripture, the secular past is viewed and interpreted by the prophets as revealing God's pleasure or displeasure. Remember, there is no wrathful real God. This wrathful God doesn't exist in my eyes. There's only one I. There's only one true source, and that exists everything of all possibility, probability, and potential. The inevitability of it all manifests within the Father. This is light and dark and middling. Victory or defeat in war, peace or social unrest, abundance of harvest or famine, serve to demonstrate the virtue of sinfulness of the nation and to forecast its future destiny. In the scrolls, the apocalyptic compositions form past of this latter tradition. On the other hand, apart from occasional snippets, in a liturgical calendar. The Qumran writers, while meditating on the words of the Old Testament prophets, sought to discover in them allusions to their own past, present, and future. Non-historical sources provide our fragments. Even with the help of archaeological data from Qumran, they cannot be made into a consistent and continuous narrative. For an understanding of the sect's past as it developed within the larger framework of the Second Temple Jewish history, we have to rely principally on Flavius Josephus, another Jewish Hellenist, such as the author of the books of the Maccabees. Okay, what we shall do here is we shall actually delete this slide here. Bear with me seconds, because it's already in this slide. So let's go continue. Okay, sorry for the duplication there. Okay, the history of the Essenes. Story of the movement begins with the Master's document, because it is a writing particularly rich in such hints. The birth of the community is said to have occurred in the age of wrath, 390 years after the destruction of Jerusalem by Nebuchadnezzar, the king of Babylon. A root sprung, the root being the Essenes, a root being something that is the foundation of their faith and the religion, the true ascetic nature of it. This is the root sprung. This is where the Essenes are said to have launched. Sprung from Israel and Aaron, i.e. a group of pious Jews, laymen and priests came into being in a situation of general ungodliness around them. These people groped for the way for 20 years, and then God sent them a teacher, this is the master and guardian, to guide them in the way of his heart. A faction described as seekers of smooth things. Smooth things are describing that anything of grace. The smoothness of grace, that rest is of grace. The smooth, not the not the rough, jagged edges of something that is not of grace. Removers of the bounds and the builders of the wall. All metaphors. The leaders of the breakaway party accorded a number of unflattering sobriquets, such as scoffer, liar, or spouter of lies. So there's someone who was obviously not of the master and the guardian within them, who split away. Seems to be one of the same person. The teacher of righteousness was gathered in, meaning that he had died. In the meantime, the wicked dominated over Jerusalem and temple. So this scoffer of lies is what is spreading the wickedness outside of the temple. The Habakkuk commentary, with its explicit mention of desertion by disciples to the teacher of righteousness, to the liar. So remember, this happened in the Buddhist texts as well. If you look at the Tipitaka and look at that, you'll also find that they also had a spin-off group there who went against Buddha and taught their own versions. So these were regarded as lies also. And it's commonplace in many other movements as we read them. Was called by the name of truth. Before he became Israel's ruler and was corrupted by wealth and power, he also sinned against the teacher of righteousness and his disciples. Okay, continuing the history of these scenes. He vilified and outraged the elect of God, plotted to destroy the poor, i.e. the community, and stole their riches. As a punishment, God delivered him into the land of his enemies. At the last judgment, the wicked priest will empty the cup of wrath. His successors, the last priest of Jerusalem, are also charged with amassing money and wealth by plundering the peoples, i.e. foreigners. But so the comment asserts all their riches and booty will be snatched from them by the Kittim, the Romans in other words, who were the foreigners, the conquerors of the world, commissioned by God to pay them their just deserts. So it's really going back to what the Apocryphal Old Testament says. The Judean people turned away from God and therefore were punished, handed into the hands of their enemies. The Nahum commentary moves to an age following that of the teacher of righteousness and the wicked priest, as neither of them is mentioned. The principal character here is a furious young lion, a Jewish ruler of Jerusalem. In the commentaries of Habakkuk and Nahum, the Kittim are represented as the instruments appointed by God to punish the ungodly priests of Jerusalem. Several Qumran hymns reflect the career and sentiments of the teacher, possibly of the teacher of righteousness himself. He was opposed by the interpreters of error, traitors, deceivers, and those who seek smooth things, all of whom were formerly his friends and members of his covenant. And there's a little passage here. This is like a poem or a song. Teachers of lies have smoothed thy people with words. The false prophets have led them astray. They have banished me from my land like a bird from its nest. And they, teachers of lies and seers of falsehood, have schemed against me a devilish scheme, to exchange the law engraved on my heart by thee for the smooth things which they speak to thy people. And they withhold from the thirsty to drink of knowledge, and assuage their thirst with vinegar, that they may gaze on their straying, on their fully concerning their feast days, and on the fall into the snares. So this is effectively meaning that those who have decided to move away into the false doctrines, remember false doctrines, and have fallen away into straying, and are not they're withholding knowledge from them, rather they are taking vinegar and not following the law that's engraved for smooth things. Another hymn appears to hint that teachers withdraw from society and to announce with confidence his eventual glorious justification. For thou, O God, hast sheltered me from the children of men, and hast hidden thy law within me, against the time when thou shalt reveal thy salvation to me. This is an interesting poem, and it's true, depending how you read it. It's true in all respects, I think. God, the Divine Father, shelters all, but the true sheltering comes when one recognizing the Father exists and moves oneself towards it as a transcendental part of life, i.e. becoming that journey. Has hidden the law within me. This is true. Now, I had a story a long time ago, I've mentioned it many times before, about a book. I was shown a book, metaphorically, a visualization image described to me as a book. It was opening, the book was opening, the pages were turning, and colours were floating out from the pages. What was this? I was asking myself, and I knew it was regarding knowledge. But only many years later, I truly understood what that was. What that was gnosis. It was telling me that the gnosis that I seek, the gnosis that is going to transcend and ascend me toward, move my soul towards the Spirit and the breath of the Father, is that book. It's not a real book, but it's a book. It's knowledge, it's truth, it's the divine law, it's the divine knowing of all that is could ever be, all potentiality and possibility. The truth and the secrets that are not secrets. This book is with us all. We have to ask the Divine Father to bring assistance to us, to unveil and open this book within us, to unveil that gnosis within us, turn those pages, as the petals on a flower unveil their truth and the golden center. So against the time when thou shalt reveal from that book within you, the salvation is that gnosis, is the engulfing and the embrace of the Father. Once more and more knowledge, more and more connection is established. It would be unrealistic, taking into account the vagueness of all these statements, the cryptic nature of the symbolism, and the entire lack of any systematic exposition of the sect's history, to expect every detail to be identified. We can, however, attempt to define the chronological framework of the historical references and thus be in a position to place at least some of the key events and principal personalities within the context of Jewish history as we know it. This is the author's commentary. That the initial phase of the community's existence must have preceded by some years or decades the actual establishment of the sect of Qumran. Now, this is where the Essenes were established before the Qumran community. They existed before. As I mentioned, there was a splinter from the chaos. The Nahum community implies that a king by the name of Antiochus, who was alive at the beginning of the period in which the documents are concerned, can only have been Antiochus IV, Epiphanes, notorious for his looting of Jerusalem and the profanation of the temple in 169-168 BCE. In the Damascus documents of the beginnings of the sect's beginning up to the age of wrath, 399 years of the conquest of Jerusalem by Nebuchadnezzar, This should bring us to 196 BCE. There are still compelling reasons for placing the age of wrath in the opening decades of the second pre-Christian century. The reign of the Antiochus Epiphanes of 175-164 BCE, and the probable date of the foundation of Qumran, which is 150-140 BCE. During this time, 5 men held office of high priest. 3 of them were pro-Greek, Jason, Menelaus, and Asimus. The remaining 2 were Maccabee brothers, Jonathan and Simon. So it's basically saying the Essenes came in before the Qumran was founded. Finally, Josephus depicts the vivid language and the bravery of the Essenes subjected to torture by the Romans. The Romans were Kittim, or called Kittim, were the ones who destroyed the Qumran community. The way with the Romans tried their souls through and through by a variety of tests. Wrapped and twisted is how they punished them. Wrapped and twisted, burned and broken, and made to pass through every instrument of torture in order to induce them to blaspheme their lawgiver and to eat some forbidden thing. They refused to yield to neither demand, nor ever once did they cringe to their persecutors or shed a tear. Smiling in their agonies and mildly deriding their tormentors, they cheerfully resigned their souls, confident that they would receive them back again. Now, receive them back again, what does that mean? Now, that could even mean everlasting life, post-life, or it could also mean reincarnation of the soul into another life body. Reincarnation is mentioned, I believe, from what I understand, before the Council of Nicaea's rewriting 300 AD of the biblical text. There was mention of reincarnation in the original writings. This is something I may uncover and present to you all, because reincarnation is a reality, an absolute reality. Everyone will find out in the end, because there is only one truth, remember. We can all believe many things, but when we die, there will only be one truth presented to us in the end. Okay, continuing on here in the final slide. Since it would appear from this passage that the Romans were persecuting not individuals but a group, it is tempting, bearing in mind the archaeologist's claim that the Qumran settlement was destroyed by the Romans, to associate with the story of the Essenes captured by the Dead Sea. If such a surmise is correct, the sect's disappearance from the history may well have been brought about in a lethal blow suffered by its central establishment during the fateful summer of 68 CE AD. The fact that no attempt was made to recover nearly 800 manuscripts from the caves confirms it would seem such a reconstruction at the end of Qumran, and with the annihilation of its central establishment of the whole Essene movement. So what he's saying is the fact that they must have been totally destroyed because there was no attempt to actually recover those hidden scrolls that were hidden before the Romans attacked and destroyed the community completely. Okay, thank you again. So this is the end of the presentation. I appreciate you all listening to this and your thoughts. I welcome your thoughts on what's being said, and as we walk through this, please comment. And please like and subscribe, particularly because it helps this channel move and gets more propagation to others. I'm not here, I don't promote, I don't even have adverts on here. My communities, those who look at this are not big enough for any of that. But I want to spread what this channel is for to others. So if you find others useful, will find this useful, please promote, please ask them to come over, like and subscribe to the channel so let it grow. The more likes it has and more subscriptions it has, the more the algorithms promote it. Remember, the second coming was always you. It is the knowledge. Sorry for the coughing, it gets dry when I cough, when I speak a lot and get my eyes dry. Drink some more water more often. To become all that is, all that we are, you have to revive it from yourself. It has to be transformative in spirituality, which means it must become you. Anything else is just ritual. I heard someone say today that it was churchianity. What does this mean? Well, it could be anything. Could be in a synagogue or a temple or a mosque. It's where people just go for virtue. Churchianity, rather than actual transformational spirituality, is that which you take transcendental learning, gnosis from the literature, and also yourself, your meditation, your prayer. You ask the divine to guide you to it. It must be part of life. It must be part of life. Otherwise, it has little value. It dissipates in the air. So become and be what it is that you're trying to become. It's critically important that that this occurs. Okay, I want to say thank you all for listening to the presentation today. There are more to come. As I said, I've transcribed much of it. And I'll say thank you to all, and take care of yourselves, and all the best until next time. Thank you, and God bless.